The genre of Western films has given some amazing, heartbreaking, and satisfying moments throughout time, and the majority of the time they usually consist of a character whose presence really takes the film to another level. Many actors over the years who have made their name known in Hollywood have either earned it from or on the coattails of Western films. Tonight, we have a discussion of sorts on which actors are truly the best in the West. This is a Comic Talkers production, and you are listening to a oh so sweet episode of Just for Flicks. What's going on, guys? It's your boy Patty B. With me, as always, is this guy named Mr. B Dog, Mr. Brandon. What's going on, man? How we doing tonight?
Actually, I'm not going by Brandon and I'm going by Doug Dimmadome, home of the home Dimmadome, all that. From Very Odd Parents. Come on now. No, I'm excited. This is a fun discussion because there's a lot of great actors in the world of westerns that are really is what set the standard for cinema from here on out. But we couldn't do this without two guests of ours. First off, I want to welcome back to the podcast John from John's Comics with Kids. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing great. I love a good talk around Westerns, and there are some icons definitely from the acting side.
Absolutely. And we were welcoming back to another great guest of ours. Please welcome back from the Pulling These podcasts, Mr. Elmer. Elmer, how are you doing?
Doing great, doing great. Get to talk about a genre I love, so it's all good.
So what we're going to be doing, fans, is we're taking one after each that we feel that we have sat there and we've watched their films. We actually love their films. All of us have different actors that we're going to be pitching. And at the end, we'll kind of throw some different actors that, okay, we didn't pitch them, but here's some other great ways to get into Westerns. Um, I think I think John, you should start us off because you did decide to go with a pretty big name heavy hitter when it comes to Western.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of felt like as many great actors as there have been in Western films, it for me as a cinema goer and film fan, it really comes down to two, and John Wayne is the one I went with because for me growing up, this I can't say the word Western without picturing John Wayne. It just they go together. It's just that simple. I'm not talking about him being the greatest performer in cinema, but as far as the actor who is quintessential to Western movies, it's the Duke. And he's got 83, count them, 83 Westerns to his credit. Some of the most iconic Western films ever made: The Searchers, Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Rio Bravo, Stagecoach, The Shootist. The guy is just, he's done it all and done it really well, thanks to obviously guys like John Ford and Howard Hawks.
What are you talking about, Pilgrim? John Wayne. When you think westerns, is an automatically thought. It is. You cannot sit there and not say I've not watched a movie with John Wayne. It's hard. It's like, I think my first one was The Longest Day, and even then, when you listen to how he talks in that film, it's like this guy's from Western. It's like you can see the way he portrays himself in that film, um, just all the way down to even the way he walks and does his things. He's Western. He is from a Western movie. Um, let's talk about it, John. Let's see. What was your first memory with John Wayne? What's your first movie you remember watching, John?
Oh, it probably wasn't one of his famous ones. I know around my house that my dad showed all of them and we watched all of them, my brothers and I. It's probably War Wagon with Kirk Douglas, which is not one of his best westerns. I mean, I think Kirk has like a leather it's like a leather vest and a leather scarf he wears around his neck. It's he yeah. There's a whole conversation about him wearing a ring and that's how he got the dimple on his chin. Like it is a bizarre Western with white people playing Native Americans and all the great cliches. And it was like made later in his career. So that's probably one of the earliest ones I saw.
Okay. What about you, Elmer? What was your first memory with John Wayne? What's a memory of yours? A movie you like watching or not like watching?
First memory of John Wayne was probably The Searchers.
Yeah.
Cause I remember like back in the day, Fox would play like westerns during like Saturday afternoon sometimes. It was either westerns or samurai films, so it was either or. So you'll get like a lot of those films for the 50s and the 60s on rotation there. And it was like one of those movies that will they'll it was John Wayne, so he was one of the popular actors back in the day or whatnot. It was one of the movies, you know how you knew about John Wayne even if you didn't watch any of his movies, his mannerisms, the way he talked, the way he acted, hey Pilgrim and all that stuff.
Hey, Pilgrim.
Yeah, so he was a force. He was like for a while he was anonymous with the Western, right? Like you knew of him, if anything.
What about you, Pat?
Yeah, well, like Elmer said, The Searchers was probably my first exposure to him. I didn't really grow up liking his movies so much, or I kind of stayed away from watching them. But The Searchers was actually recommended to me from a friend, and I watched it. And as you know, Brandon, with me in movies, I really enjoy visuals. That's one thing that catches me. Like if it's got a lot of good visuals or cinematography, the way it's shot, I love that stuff. And when I first watched this movie, I was blown away. I was like, holy shit, this is awesome for how old of a film this is, like it's before its time. But yeah, the Searchers was definitely my first exposure to John Wayne.
So mine was actually The Man Who Shot Liberty Vance was my first Western with him. Now, mind you, my first movie with him overall wasn't even a Western. It was The Longest Day, which is a pretty acclaimed war film, but he wasn't the reason why that was an acclaimed war film. You know,
Yeah.
but my first Western was Liberty Vance. And I think the reason why is because I am a big Lee Marvin fan. So anytime Lee Marvin was in a film, I would watch it because I loved him. And it would annoy my grandma so much. But the thing is that this is where I saw an iconic duo, which was James Stewart and John Wayne. This is iconic for this movie. The whole twist at the end of the film is so well done. And I don't think if you would have mixed another actor in for James Stewart, I don't think you would have gotten that same film. It's a really well told film. John Wayne is not the focus of the film until that very end. That's when
Yeah.
he stole the show and went, look, you don't know the whole story, what really happened. And it's so well told. That's what got me to like John Wayne films and get me more into them. But I think that's what's so hard for me is the way he talks. It's not a lot of filling. It's like a sense of this is what he's known for and he's okay with it. And this is how he's going to act.
I don't want to derail you on war films, but I'm Sands of Iwo Jima is another
Mm-hmm.
great performance from him. Not a lot of movies where he dies, and that obviously that one and Liberty Valance you mentioned, and in my head I was like, oh, that's interesting. Some of the early films that maybe you saw with him were the tragic ones, maybe.
Like how I was with Lee Marvin, my grandma would do that with John Wayne. And because I like certain John Wayne films, it's hard for me to watch him in others. And he's one of those actors that you can like. He's iconic for westerns, but some of his movies have not aged well. And when you
Yes.
look at them,
Like
yeah,
the time he played was it Genghis Khan? I think he played.
yes, God.
Whoa.
I think they got a little bit from Lawrence of Arabia having alligators.
Just don't go there. Not a,
Yeah.
not a rewatch.
He was like, at least I tried,
Now, let's go around really quickly too. I think for me, I already spoke. My favorite movie was Liberty Vance of his. John, what's your like? I know you talked about your first experience, but what is your overall favorite performance of John Wayne?
I mean, if you're going westerns, I like what he does in The Shootist. I think there's something really there's a lot of weight to it. I felt like he was bringing his own life to the character, what was going on there, and reflecting on everything he had done. Like the character is reflecting on, much like in Unforgiven with Eastwood, he's really reflecting on maybe a life that was misspent I've got these skills that have allowed me to be successful as basically a killer, and now I'm reflecting on it. So there's some power to what he's doing there. As far as just performance in general, I can't recommend The Quiet Man enough because it's really an unusual pick for him because it's a romantic comedy and it's about going home to Ireland and talk about cinematography for Pat. Like it's just stunning. It's everything you would imagine and want Ireland to look like. You want to go right into that pub and get a pint. You want to go walk through those fields and see a beautiful redhead walking along. Like you just, it's so captivating. And it's an understated role in the sense that he doesn't speak a ton, and you can see tragedy in his backstory and his life and what he's carrying, the guilt he's carrying, the character is carrying with him. It's gorgeous film, beautiful.
I'll have to say Rio Bravo. I think that was like I want to say like from the films I watched from his, that was like the most like the cast, the supporting cast he had. It was like the interaction they had with each other was more like lighthearted than it was in his other movies. So it's one of those movies you could watch all the time. Like, all right, this is like an easy movie to watch. It's it got good action scenes in it, but it's not too intense.
Yeah.
It has great performances from the supporting cast. It was one of the less serious John Wayne roles, I think, in my opinion.
Okay. What about you, Pat?
Um, One of my favorite movies of his, and I think it's because I watched the newer version of the film and it kind of made me go back to it, is True Grit. I just like the story in general. I know the newer version is directed by the Coen brothers, who I'm a big fan of the Coen brothers. So, of course, you just sucker me into watching it. Um, but yeah, no, I like I said, I love the story of it. It's a perfect John Wayne movie, right? I mean, it seems like it's the perfect role for him. Uh, but yeah, no, True Grit, and I think that seems like a movie that be synonymous with Western movies, right? What you hear that name or that movie name, and you're like, oh yeah, Westerns, yeah.
Did you ever see the sequel? Because he did a sequel called Rooster Cogburn with Kathleen Hepburn. It's
Okay.
actually not bad. It's not a bad sequel.
I have not seen it, but I will definitely put it on my list for
Yeah.
sure.
I think they just did it to cash in on him winning an Oscar, and then they partnered him with another Oscar-winning talent like Katharine Hepburn, and it was like, let's just see what they do together. And they have great chemistry.
It's that was a great film. I remember watching that with my grandma because she's a big Captain Hepburn fan. So she was like, "Yeah, you got to watch." So like, of course, there's John Wayne again, and then all of a sudden. But I
Yeah.
actually did enjoy the film. It was a good film.
It's crazy to think there's a young Dennis Hopper in
Yeah,
yeah.
Well,
Isn't
and
that crazy?
and a young Robert Duvall,
Yeah.
in the True Grit, he was the baddie in True Grit, so
Yeah.
it's
yeah.
it's shocking because it's Robert Duvall's one of those actors too. When you really think about it, you really don't think about him till he gets older. And like he's even in To Kill a Mockingbird. People forget he's in that movie. It's when you see him in younger roles, it's harder for you to imagine him. And compared
Yeah.
to his older movies, where or when he's older, you have more iconic movies with him. You
He
know,
went white and bald so young. I think it was kind of like he just was always old.
he was old in the 70s.
Yeah,
I
I
was
mean, legitimately.
7, you don't know.
Yeah.
But all right, let's go to Elmer. Elmer, you got the next big honcho that you want to talk about when it comes to West.
Yes, yes. It's Mr. Squinty Eyes himself, Mr. Clint Eastwood. And yeah, man, Clint Eastwood is pretty much the man who got me into the whole Western genre with Unforgiven. Then got the Man with No Name trilogy right here on Blu-ray. So I'm a big fan of those films. He's been in like what 14 westerns, something like that, and just 3 spaghetti westerns. I was surprised about that. Like you will think he will be in more spaghetti westerns, but he was just in that trilogy, and that was it, pretty much for his spaghetti westerns. So that was, and his characters. I mean, I enjoyed his character more in Unforgiven than his other movies because there was so much nuance in that character. There was so much going on, and it was like you know before it became like cliche for his portrayal of his main characters in his movies. Clint Eastwood really didn't have to say much in that movie to portray the emotions he's feeling, the anger he's feeling in Unforgiven. Even with the Man with No Name trilogy, he hardly spoke in those. You even know his name in those movies, but he still had that aura, that presence of the character that you really didn't need to know his backstory. But that's why I think I like Unforgiven more because you had a backstory with William Money
Mm.
and like what he did in his past and how he's trying to atone for that. But it's not really like there's no really any forgiveness for what he's done in his life. And I think that film captured what a man who's going through that, how he will react to certain situations, how he'll react to seeing his friends dying and stuff like that. And it's just like he just brought all that energy and all that emotion and all that, everything in that character. And it was just like, wow, that's like a fucking cowboy right there. You know what I mean? That's like that shows you like, yeah, I might have been this badass outlaw, but that took a lot of my soul pretty much. I'm alive. I survived everything, but I have pretty much a little of my soul left after all I went through and all I seen. So that performance alone, and then you see his other work like in the Man with No Name trilogy and the Outlaw and all those other roles he played at the Western. He has that aura. Like, yeah, he's the main character.
Like even then, like you got to remember too. It's just like John Wayne. Clint Eastwood did start off in westerns. He was in a show
Yeah,
called Rawhide. He
yeah.
was in it for a short amount of time. He wasn't in it very long, but it still kind of boosted his career to get into westerns. And I think, and I agree with you there. Like it's a sense of like he can portray emotion without showing emotion, and I think that's so well done because you see that in more of his recent movies that doesn't even deal with westerns. Like Gran Torino, I think is a perfect example of that, where you see that emotion from him, but without showing the emotion. Like in his like he's not crying, he's not doing any of that. He can still feel sad without having to show it.
Yeah.
And I think that's great with Unforgiven. Unforgiven is one of my favorite Clint Eastwood films with westerns, and it's that. And I would probably say Josie Wells is another big one to me. I enjoy Josie. I almost said Joycey. I and
Sounds like
Josie,
you're from Jersey.
Josie,
Yeah.
Josie Shaw. No, no, I'm not
Joycey Whale.
Josie Whale. No, it's just he's a really well done actor with that. And westerns fits him. You have that where it's like you say, you talk about the squinty eyes. That's what he's iconic for. Like you just have those,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
he's the one. Like you've seen other actors do it, but you have not seen anybody get to that point.
No, it's like he's piercing through your soul while you're looking
Mm.
at him on screen. You know what I mean? It's just like, what are you looking at, dude?
Well,
Like,
like you want me to tell you the weirdest movie I've seen him do that in? It's one Patrick and I have talked about in the past. It is a one that you would never think him in. It was Trouble with the Curve, and you can see him with those squinty eyes at points, and
Oh
it's
my gosh.
it's like, bro, when he looks at Matthew Lillard that way, it's
Well,
like
even with Gran Torino, like
yeah,
Gran Torino, he's like,
get off my lawn.
yeah.
It's just, or I love how he just pulls out the M1 Grand there. But let's talk about this. Let's do the same thing. What was your guys' first exposure plus your favorite movie of Clint Eastwood in a Western film?
my first exposure to Clint Eastwood was pretty much watching The Good and Bad and the Ugly like one Saturday afternoon on TV, just having it play in the background because as a kid you're not gonna sit through like 3 hours, even like 5 hours because it's on TV with commercials. So that's pretty much the whole afternoon. But the action scenes in that were pretty great. His relationship with Tuco in that was hilarious at times. It was so many great moments in that film, and that happens to be my favorite film of his too. It's like a toss up between Unforgiven and The Good, the Bad, and Ugly for me. Sometimes I favor Unforgiven more because like my first encounter with him as a Western actor in that genre. So yeah, I'll say Unforgiven.
Okay. What about you, John?
Well, my first I mean, I probably saw him as Dirty Harry before I saw him in a Western, and it was probably one of the crappier Dirty Harrys, not like actually dirty. It was probably the
Yeah.
Jim Carrey. By the way, Jim Carrey's in Deadpool. If you guys didn't know that, the
Oh
Deadpool
shit.
film, not the superhero. They
Ryan
did a Dirty Harry
Reynolds.
film, the final one, yeah, called the Deadpool.
Mhm.
Space. There's a space between Dead and Pool. Jim Carrey has a horrible performance in it. Um, uh, I was probably that's probably where I first saw him, and maybe some of the ones with the orangutan, the Any Which Way But Loose. I probably saw some of those as my first experiences with him, and then later maybe got into his Western stuff.
All right. What about you, Pat?
So like my first exposure, like what John was saying with like Dirty Harry, like I was introduced to other movies of his before the Westerns, but if I had to say Westerns, um, I'll probably go to what Elmer was saying. I remember sitting with my dad one time, and I think The Good and the Bad and the Ugly was on, and he was, kind of showing me, he's like, "Oh, watch this, watch that," like I was super young at the time when we watched it, and is it The Good and the Bad and the Ugly that has the scene with when he has the makeshift what's it called, bulletproof vest, or I believe is that
That's
oh,
for a few dollars more, I
is
think.
that $2
Yeah,
more?
yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
And it might have been that one. Because I just remember seeing that scene and being like, "Oh wow, that's pretty cool." Like, and then he takes it off, throws it on the ground.
Yeah.
I remember I'm sidetracking here, but I'm a big wrestling fan, and they ended up doing that angle in wrestling where someone had a metal thing like that, and someone did a move, and they're like, "Oh, he's hurt," hurts himself. It's so stupid. Anyway, that's just one thing that
The
sticks in my.
Bret Hart and Goldberg, we know.
Yeah, that's what it is right there. Yep, the spear.
For the spear.
Yep. But yeah, I would say yeah, a few dollars more would probably be the one.
So
Uh, and we didn't I didn't I should have said High Plains Drifter as well as like as far as westerns. Like if people missed that one, another he's called the Stranger. He shows up in the town, the bad guys are coming, and he's gotta basically the town pays him to like protect them, but he basically forces them to like learn how to fight and like take care of themselves. And they paint the town red, literally, to like warn, like to like scare the crap out of the guys. And then Eastwood like takes off and leaves the townspeople to take care of themselves. Great, great movie, and Eastwood's badass in that.
I I think I can outdo John with one of his worst movies. Okay, ready? It's a military movie, not very well received. It's a Marine movie.
Is this Heartbreak Ridge or whatever?
That was my first ever
Isn't
introduction.
that People's as well?
Wow.
It's yeah, that's
Yeah.
a
I
How many?
enjoy it because that was one of my first war movies. Do I like it as a story? No, but I love the references, and I grew up in a Marine family, so it was just hearing them. My first Western with him was actually Hang 'em High.
oh yeah.
That was a really interesting film, got me into my love for Clint Eastwood. And then my favorite overall, I would probably go still Josie Wells. Josie
Yeah.
Wells to me was still my favorite. I love Unforgiven, but it's one of those movies like I can't sit there and watch. I could sit there and watch Josie Wells. Like it is a
Totally.
really well told story. I love the good, bad, and the ugly for a fistful or for a few dollars more and a fistful of dollars, but I had to be in the right mood for them to watch them.
Mhm.
It's not something I could just sit there and just put on and just watch. I have to be in the right frame of mind. But Josie Wells, I could watch anytime. It's just a really well told story. I'll go ahead and go to mine. This is not one you really think about, and we've talked about an actor who has said something about probably one of his famous movies. I'm going Gary Cooper. I do love me some Gary Cooper in this. Now, mind you, this is probably not his biggest realm. One of his biggest movies is still The Pride of the Yankees. When you really think about it, that's Lou Gehrig. But my favorite movie with him in it is High Noon. It is a really well told story. He did win an Oscar for it. But how we talked about Clint Eastwood and how he doesn't have to show emotion, I love that about Gary Cooper because Gary Cooper, you can tell wears his emotions on his sleeve and you can see it. And it works so well. Like High Noon, I don't think we would have gotten that, or I don't think it would have been a good enough movie if he didn't show that. When you really see him go into the church and really be let down by nobody standing up with him, his conversation with the old sheriff in town. It's that type of acting, that his nonverbal communication in that film was so well done. And I feel like having that, and then when you get those last little monologues from him, where he's like, you know what, pretty much, I'm done with you guys. You weren't there for me when I needed you, and I've risked my whole life for years for you. The sense of a city that doesn't belong or doesn't need the hero, doesn't deserve the hero. Some other movies that he's in, I love him in Man of the West is another big one of his. Veracruz, which is him and Burt Lancaster in that film, is amazing. Distant Drums, Springfield Rifle, The Virginian, The Hanging Tree. And I feel like he actually portrays his characters really well, with more courage and honesty. You know, he's really just a really well told story and he has really good chemistry with pretty much any actor he's with. He really does. And it's a really well, I'm trying to find the right word to say. It's sad this guy did not win a lot more Oscars for his awards, because High Noon, like, he won for two. He won for Sergeant York, and then he won for High Noon, and that's it. And High Noon at the time was controversial. It was not a really, at the time, communism was a big thing. The McCarthy trials were going on. So this was, of course, a target, because when you really look at the premise of the story, it was a jab at Hollywood and the government. But yeah, Gary Cooper is one of those actors that I just feel like a lot of people sit on and don't think about when you really think about Westerns. And that's what makes him so interesting to watch. You know, and every movie I've watched him in, I have really enjoyed him. He's a good actor.
He's captivating. I think you relate to him real easily.
Yeah. It's, you know, like, it's not like John Wayne where he's set out to be the hero, or it could be that. He's not looking for that. He's looking just straight up as, I'm a person, I'm just like you. And it's just, he does really well with that, you know, and that's the type of actor he's always been. He's never been an actor that I want to be the hero. I don't care. He plays characters that are looking for redemption. You know, it's a sense of storytelling that Gary Cooper's just really well done with, and I just love it.
I mean, on the Western side, you're never going to beat High Noon. I'm sorry, it's the greatest
Yeah.
of his. I mean, it's top notch all the way. It's just a phenomenal movie. But my first exposure, and the movie that I probably think of with him most often, is Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. I'm a Capra fan, and I remember seeing that as a kid and just like really being into it. For anybody who's seen the Adam Sandler movie Deeds, that's just a remake, almost perfectly remaking the Gary Cooper film, which is way better, by the way. The Gary Cooper film is phenomenal, and it's the Adam Sandler's an Adam Sandler movie. I just, something about his just kind-hearted, gentle guy who's going to the big city, and people are trying to take advantage of him, but in the end, he helps transform a lot of them to understand like what it means to be a good person. And it's all of the qualities that you said about Gary Cooper wrapped in one movie. You instantly like him. You know he's in over his head, and you're hoping the best for him because he's got all these great qualities.
Oh, well, my favorite Western will be High Noon, of course. I don't think anybody's gonna
Yeah.
say anything different about that. But then my first exposure to him was The Pride of the Yankees, actually. Growing up in New York, you had to see that movie at least once in your life, especially as a Yankees fan. The speech at the end that he gives, still to this day is one of those best speeches in films. Like the way he acted, the way he became so likable as an actor. It shows in most of his movies he's in. From Mr. Deeds to Pride of the Yankees to High Noon, he's Sergeant York. He's always a presence that you're just watching to see what he's gonna do next.
It's sad, you know, we love Gary Cooper in that film, but we also learn in that film how much Babe Ruth can't act. And it's sad that he's playing himself in that movie and he still couldn't act.
Ah. It's the 30s, baby. This is like, here, just read the cards, babe.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, he kind of he kind of takes you out the moment when he's on screen.
Yeah, he's really looking, and then you just imagine like that's not how Lou Gehrig played. This is
Yeah.
not how he did things.
So I think I'm for me personally, it's high noon. That's just what I kind of came up on for Gary Cooper. Uh I think when you see him on screen, he seems just like a like I wouldn't say typical Western actor, but he's like the staple of Western actors, if that makes sense. You see him and you're like, man, that dude's, a cowboy. That dude's, he's an outlaw, or whatever it may be. I think he just has that appearance, that charisma, um, to apply himself to a genre such as this. Uh, I've only seen High Noon, I'm gonna say, I think maybe twice. I'm not too familiar with it. Not too familiar with Gary Cooper in itself, but there are a couple. Why you laugh? I see you laughing over there.
Oh, I'm gonna make you become a Gary Cooper fan. Just you watch.
Yeah, I had a feeling that was coming. No, it's just
It's
I know that my grandfather watched a lot of westerns, and I wouldn't be surprised if the westerns he watched had Gary Cooper in them.
well,
So
you want me to tell you why I said what I said in the beginning, though, too, that there was an actor that we've already talked about when it came
yeah.
to High Noon. John Wayne has come out and said that is the most un-American movie ever. But I think it speaks volumes when you look at Gary Cooper, because Gary Cooper wasn't out to be a hero. He
Mm-mm.
wasn't. He was the city. It was like High Noon. You really, like we said, it's like the whole story of the city doesn't deserve the hero. But even then, was Gary Cooper's character really asking to be the hero? It's the whole sense of everybody looks up to him, but in reality, he's just as scared as anybody else is. And it's a really well told story. And I think that's why when you really look at it, but you got to remember, John Wayne was, I'm the big name actor that supports the government and everything like that. Pilgrim, all that stuff. It's just Gary Cooper is just really well done. But yeah, they were friends. They were still friends to that day. Um, but yeah. So Pat, talk to you. Who's your actor that you're choosing?
Talk to me.
Hey,
So my actor, I feel like he's probably another one of those actors that you don't think of being a Western actor. When I was doing my research, it looked like he was up to 20 different Western films. Not to mention he was also, I think, got his start in a Western TV show, Colt 45. Going with Charles Bronson. Um, I when I was introduced to Western movies when I was a kid, one of the very first films I was introduced to was, and I've talked about it with you, is The White Buffalo with Charles Bronson. Um, Down the road, I've seen obviously Once Upon a Time in the West, which is one of Sergio Leone's masterpieces. I think Charles Bronson gives off this vibe where he's very reserved. He's quiet, but when he talks, he means it. Um, and it also comes along with certain roles that he takes, like I know in The White Buffalo, he's a little bit more, like I said, reserved when it comes to like Once Upon a Time in the West when he's with Henry Fonda, it's a little bit more aggressive, obviously, right? It just depends on the characters he's interacting with. No, but I just think that he's had a great career as far as Western movies go, and that's not even, counting the action movies he was in. Would you guys consider him more of an action movie actor compared to Westerns?
I would, but like that's just because of how many Death Wish movies the
Yeah,
I
guy
was just gonna
made.
I was
say,
about to say
well, I was gonna
that.
say, like when you really think about it, that's really all I can think with him in it action
yeah.
wise. But those are so popular. Like I'm
I'm,
not meaning in a bad way. I just
I'm
never
gonna
grew up.
throw shenanigans on you with my movie once Pat's done. So I'm going next when Pat's done.
Like I'm gonna shut Brandon down
I'm
now.
gonna do it. Don't worry, Pat. I got you.
Appreciate that.
But All right, I guess it is going to turn to John now.
No, the first movie I saw him in, and the first time and I go to this every time I think of Charles Bronson is The Dirty Dozen. The guy
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
is a
I forget.
badass. Yeah, yeah. Choke on those Lee Marvin love you were given earlier because Lee Marvin's the boss in that too. So for whatever reason, The Dirty Dozen is the first thing that comes to mind. Later, maybe obviously Magnificent Seven, things like that.
Yeah.
He's obviously had a great career, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, Pat.
Another movie that I really enjoy of his is Breakheart Pass.
I don't know that one.
It's a Western one. It's in 19 I think it's yeah, 1975 is
Adding it
for
to the list.
yeah, it's really not a
But
lot of not a
But
lot of
something
big
about the Dirty Dozen, and he's one of the more redeemable guys in that
I
movie.
think that's
yeah,
what
yeah.
makes him so interesting because at this point, I couldn't even remember he was in that movie. Like when you really think about it, Lee Marvin is the main person.
Yeah,
You have what was it? You have isn't Jim Brown in the movie
Jim
too?
Brown, Donald Sutherland.
What was the other one? Teddy Savalas is
Yep,
another big one.
Telly. Yep.
It's when I really think about it, Bronson doesn't like he is redeemable, but he's not a character when you really think about it. It's not one you go, oh yeah, Bronson's in that movie.
I mean,
He
obviously, it's a big cast. There's 12 lead characters, right?
yeah, but he's really great in that film. I forget he's in that movie. Now I'm gonna go watch it again. Thank you,
There
John.
you go. Got him.
Got him. No. What about you, Elmer? What was your first experience with Charles Bronson and your favorite?
Death Wish, baby. Death Wish. My first experience with Bronson, man. With a young Jeff Goldblum as a unnamed thug. And now you never saw Jeff Goldblum in the Western. How about Jeff Goldblum as a street criminal? Not too intimidating that
That
movie,
I could
but
actually understand because he plays the Grand Master in Thor Ragnarok, which it could be like a thug coming up in the
yeah,
world. But
yeah. I mean, his westerns, I probably 30,000. Yeah, that's probably yeah. My because I really didn't see him as a Western actor like growing up at all. Like most of the movies I watched of him was Death Wish.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, I finally got around to seeing Magnificent Seven again as an adult just recently. It had been decades since I'd seen it,
yeah,
and obviously Steve McQueen and Yul
Yeah.
Brynner.
yeah. Magnificent Seven. Yeah, that's what I meant. Magnificent Seven.
It's funny because whenever I see Magnificent Seven, I think of that terrible movie they made with is
isn't
it
with Chris Pratt in the new one that they just did
Yeah,
recently?
And
Denzel
Denzel.
Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
I don't know how they fucked that up.
yeah. I was
Because
like,
it's
this is not
Antoine,
the
isn't it
same.
Antoine Fuqua who's like a phenomenal
Yeah,
filmmaker? I don't know.
yeah.
They had all the pieces to make that movie amazing.
I don't know
And
what was it about, but it was just like I don't believe it. Like
Yeah.
I'm not invested in this
Mm-mm.
at
uh,
all.
but my first exposure with him was a Western, and it's one I've already brought up with Gary Cooper, and it is Veracruz. Veracruz, he plays Pittsburgh in the film. And it's so well told with Burt Lancaster, him, and all them. Of course, overall, when you really think about it, I agree with Elmer. It's Death Wish. When you really think about him in a movie, he is really well done in that film. But it gets to the point, it's like, okay, let's end this series before it gets too much.
Yeah, yeah.
But I also love him in The Great Escape. People forget he's in that movie with Steve McQueen. Um, now I got to go watch Dirty Dozen again so I can love his character in that again. But my favorite overall Western with him, it is Once Upon a Time in the West. That his demeanor in that and how he's so quiet for the most of the movie when you see him, I think that's what makes him so intimidating. Is that when you really see it, he doesn't really have a lot of monologue. He's just sitting there. He has his harmonica sitting there, doing. It's just so well done how he shot, and the scenes that matter most, he delivers. And Bronson does a really good job with that, and it's really well done. And with the supporting cast around him, like Pat talked about with Henry Fonda and all that, it just works so well. And at this point too, he was young. He wasn't really like he was just getting into bigger name movies, and it's just really well done with him. Once Upon a Time in the West. If anybody hasn't watched it, I recommend it. It is a very slow start, when you get into it. It takes a while to get into the story. So I remember watching it again recently, and I just went, okay, let's get to the main premise of the story. I'm lost here. What's going on? We're jumping from scene to scene, and I don't know a lot, but I think that's what makes it so well, is because everybody's coming from a different point of view. And Bronson does a really good job with his side. We talked about 4 actors that we love in westerns. Well, let's throw out some other names in there, because I think there's one that we have to throw out there with John Wayne is James Stewart. James
I
Stewart's
mean,
got the iconic.
Winchester 73 is really underappreciated Western. Yeah, Stewart's definitely got some good ones.
Yeah, it's sad because when you really think about him, you don't really think about him for westerns either. There's one movie that goes above all else, and it's a tradition during Christmas for most families.
Yeah. But I mean, he was obviously between his time with Hitchcock and his time with Capra, he was known for more of the modern, at least current era filmmaking, right? He wasn't known for
Yeah, he
his
was in.
period pieces.
Yeah, he was in Rear Window. He was in a lot of stuff like
Vertigo,
that.
The Man Who Knew Too Much. Rope, great one, for
Yeah,
sure.
it's that's why I said he's not really well known, or not. I'm going to say well known, but it's very underappreciated when it comes to westerns.
Totally.
Another one I'll throw out there is Henry Fonda. We've talked about him with Once Upon a Time in the West with Bronson and how he is with others. And one of my favorites is the 10 Star. It's him and Anthony Perkins. Anthony Perkins, really, again, another actor that you really wouldn't think about with westerns, and he does so well with them. It was like the passing of an or the torch to from old to new, and it's really well done with him as the new appointed sheriff. And how I love Fonda in that film, because he really turns down the badge. He turns down the 10 Star because he used to be a cop. He used to be a sheriff, and he saw somebody die on his watch, so he's refused to take on that star again. But he helps all the others, and just the supporting cast around him is great. It's just he's one that I think that's where Henry Fonda is underappreciated, because he's willing to take roles that you wouldn't even think he'd play, and he does so well in it.
And we find I know of him, but like his movies, like it's been a while since I watched anything from him, so not
What about
so
James
much.
Stewart with
James Stewart's I'm not too don't know much of his westerns. Like I know more of like, It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Smith, all that other stuff, so not too.
I was actually gonna go with Lee Van Cleef.
Yes,
Another,
I was gonna say that one.
yeah. With him being in the Dollars trilogy, pretty much, or
Yeah,
he's the two of them. He really stands out as that villain. He's got that
yeah. That
right.
face, man.
Yeah, he's
Like
the face. It's
that.
for sure. Death Rides a Horse is also another really good movie I like. I didn't realize I haven't seen Escape from New York, but he's in Escape from New York.
Yeah, he's the old guy that sends him in. He's like working for
Yeah,
the
you know.
government. He sends Snake Plissken into the city.
Okay. I
So
that
he looks like a young Jack Palance almost. He
Mhm.
doesn't look like you would picture him, but he's the guy that like gives Snake Plissken the whole info on where the
Yeah,
president is and then sends him on his mission.
yeah.
Would you guys not the sidebar, but would you guys recommend that movie? I've never watched it.
I
Escape
like
from
it a
New York.
lot. It's very dated, but I like it a ton.
Yeah, yeah,
With Kurt Russell, right?
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'll have
He's
to
This,
watch.
also in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, by the way.
yes,
Okay.
yeah,
He's one of
yeah,
Liberty's like henchmen.
yeah. I forget about that because he, again, not one
You talk
celebrity.
about spanning the eras, right? And
yeah.
Wayne, Eastwood, and then Kurt Russell. He's
Russell.
he's connecting
Yeah,
all of our Western hero dots.
there
Well, I
you
Yeah.
think
go.
that's another big name after you should throw in the bunch there too is Russell. Kurt Russell has appeared in Tombstone. He's appeared in what was it?
Hateful Eight.
Hateful Eight.
What
April
was it?
8th,
Bone. What was that? The
Bone
Bone.
Yeah.
Tomahawk.
Bone
Bone
Tomahawk.
Tomahawk.
which
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
horror
Woo.
western.
Yeah,
There's a lot of good films that Russell's in that really could pass as him being a pretty good western actor. I can
yeah.
actually
Yeah.
take him more as a western actor than compared
Kevin
to.
Costner.
I was gonna say my two are Kevin Costner and Robert Duvall. I think just open range, you got both of them in it right there. But Costner's obviously got dances, and obviously he's been doing Yellowstone for a while now. He's definitely has that gravitas to be a cowboy and can pull it off. Duvall, I mean, Duvall is, you believe it. You believe he's ridden a horse most of his life. He's gonna, whether it's all the way back, like we were saying, from True Grit, like the original True Grit with John Wayne, Lonesome Dove in the 80s. He just has that sense of like he knows his way around cattle and horse.
Yeah, it's that's why I said it's. Now, what about you, Elmer? Where are some actors that you go with that you would recommend to anybody who's trying to get into westerns?
Honestly, you guys mostly said most of the names I was gonna say. So you know,
it, it,
like it's slim pickings with like who else I want to really get into like that I actually watch. But yeah, I really I wasn't really prepared with anybody else, but besides Clint Eastwood today.
oh, let's put it this way. There's another actor, and this is the last one I'm going to throw out there is Alan Ladd. Alan Ladd from Shane is probably one of my favorite performances in any Western film. Is of course you have Gary Cooper with me with High Noon, but he's second to me with that performance with him as Shane. It is a really well told story with him. It's a gunfighter that's trying to move on from his past and come to light. But he's also had some other great iconic movies, some with John Wayne, some with different actors. He's a really well told actor. Now, here's the last question. I think it's the way to go out. Is there an actor that you wish it could be an actor that's appeared in a Western movie but has not really done a lot with Westerns, or an actor that has never touched Westerns at all? Who is an actor that you or an actress that you would love to see in a Western film?
That's a good one.
I know one of mine, and I love a movie he's in, but you don't see like you see him in an animated movie with westerns, but I don't consider that per se. But
Yeah.
also he plays in one 1995, I think it is, called Dead Man, Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp, I think, would be a really good.
You didn't see that Lone Ranger shitty movie he did?
I know what he does in that
Yeah.
movie. I tend to forget about that movie. Okay.
Shots fired.
so,
Santo.
See, I'm already taking another shots at Brandon here
Oh,
tonight. I don't know
man.
what's going on.
no, that movie, no, I can't stand.
No.
That was a universe saying we can't make Arnie Hammer a fucking superstar because of reasons.
I would go with Harrison Ford. I think he would do great in westerns. I don't know
Oh,
that he's
yeah.
ever really done enough of them. Forget Cowboys and Aliens. He did do that shitty movie.
He did that.
But
I
he
thought he was gonna
did.
be so good in that one too.
Yeah, right. I know he did a Yellowstone spinoff where he had some
Helen
time in the
Mirren
saddle.
spin-off with him.
But as far as just like a traditional western with him in the lead, I think that would have been awesome.
All right. What about you, Elmer? What's an actor that you go with?
Oof. Uh, just because this man's having a resurgence of a career right now, I would have to say Colin Farrell.
Yeah.
I would like to see him in a western.
Yeah.
Like his movie in Burris. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
In Bruges.
In Bruges, yeah.
Yeah,
In Bruges.
Great movie.
That was like one of my favorite movies of his. And like with him and Brandon Gleeson, like those two together, those are always a great pair. So I would love to see what he could do with a Western. I think he'll do a great job in the Western, I believe. He's killing it on the Penguin right now, so I can imagine what he could do.
Dude, you know what's funny is whenever I hear Colin Farrell, the first thing I think of is Phone Booth. I don't know. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know why it's the only movie that comes to my mind is just Phone Booth.
I'll take it more obscure than you. I think of Minority Report with him because he's in that movie as well with Tom Cruise.
As long as nobody's picking Miami Vice, I think we're probably all good.
We're all good. You want me to tell you another actor that I would love to see, and he's become more popular over the years from his time on The Office. I go John Krasinski. I
Yeah.
think even direct it. I think he could pull off a really good Western. We've seen his directing chops with Quiet Place, and I think he could do really well with that. That's why I said him.
I'm gonna go ahead and say it, and this might be controversial, and I might be riding on the coattails of The Hateful Eight, but I think if you gave Channing Tatum a shot to do a Western, I think that man can pull it off, dude. I was thinking either Channing Tatum or I could see Ryan Gosling being in a really good Western movie. Like with a good supporting cast around him, I think he would do well. I think he could he's got that look.
You want me to tell you another one we haven't really brought up? We've brought up his dad. We haven't brought up him. I think Wyatt Russell would be great in a Western film. Follow his own father in the footsteps of movies. Like Wyatt Russell, we're seeing him more with the MCU, but really he has not really kind of like stepped out on his own a little bit. He's always been the side character. Let's give him a role that could be something like Kurt. I think would be great, and especially with westerns. I think any good actor wants to start off, I think would be great starting off in westerns, and I think Wyatt could pull it. You know, even John Bernthal, I think would be interesting to see. But that's what I said. I'm also looking at this list somebody put together, and somebody put Gerald Butler. It's like, please don't give him any other roles. We
Oh
don't
God.
need any more movies. I put Mel
That's it.
Gibson. I'm like, no. But no, that's
Mel did Maverick, right? He did the Maverick.
oh yeah, he did do that, and then
It's not a typical Western, but
it's there. Here's one I'm shocked. There's a lot of wrestlers I could see perform Western films. I'm not going with The Rock. No.
Oh yeah, you're talking about me, yeah.
I would go Batista.
I
Seen that surge. He would like if they ever did a Once Upon a Time in the West remake, I could see him being like Bronson. He doesn't even have to say a word. He could just show how intimidating he is by just looking at you. I can see him being the idiot performing on the
What
harmonica.
about I think Stone Cold.
Yeah, that's easy though.
What?
Ever loving alcoholic drinker sitting
We
there.
go to the saloon, drink a beer, another vodka,
Yeah.
another whiskey, more beer.
I drank another beer. But no, this is why I said it's a great way to do it. Now, okay, here's another last question though. Director who's never directed a Western.
did Spielberg ever do a Western? That might be kind of fun.
Don't think he's ever done it.
I was thinking about Spielberg too.
Sorry, I keep jumping on Elmer.
Nah, it's all good, bro.
I'm going easy right now. Wes Anderson.
Of course you will.
Wow.
That would be fun.
It would be
That
very
would, could you imagine the colors? Like just
it'd be
every,
very
like
colorful. I'll go horror. I'll go Guillermo del Toro. Like Guillermo del Toro would be an interesting one to see. We see Hellboy the way he does things. I could see him pulling off something with westerns. And I think it would be well told. It might be a horror kind of story, but even then, I've never watched a Guillermo del Toro film and not been pissed with it. I think he does really well with it. And I'd be an interesting one to see. But yeah, I think it's a great way to end this podcast, huh, Pat?
I think so.
We want to thank our guests for coming on again. So first off, thank you, John, for coming on. Please tell the fans where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm John's Comics with Kids on YouTube, Instagram, a little bit on TikTok as well, talking comics and whatever else we're watching.
Awesome. And we want to thank Elmer from the Pulling These podcast for coming on to the podcast, talking Westerns with us as well. Please tell the fans where they can find you.
Right, all across social media, YouTube, Pulling These, at Pulling These, on Facebook at Pulling These Podcast. You can check us out there. All podcasts, pretty much Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts at, we're on there.
Yeah. And you can always find J4F Podcasts or Just for Flicks on Instagram and TikTok at J4F Podcasts, and check us out on Spotify, Just for Flicks. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Patty B to take us.
Yeah, thank you guys for everything. Thank you, Elmer. Thank you, John, as always. It's a pleasure having you guys on. And I reckon this was a fun one to talk about some of our Western actors. But without further ado, remember, we do it just for flicks.